Hey, welcome back to DT Performance. In today's video, we're going to continue our build on the Turbo 400, starting with the direct drum, getting our clutches assembled, our lower sprag put on, getting the piston down in there with all the springs and getting that compressed and snap ring put on. Then we'll move over to the other table. We'll get our output shaft into our lower planetary, into our front planetary, and get the lower half put in the transmission and check the stack up. So I've got everything cleaned up. I coated everything with a light coat of transmission fluid so it wouldn't rust out here in the Alabama humidity. Our clutches are soaking. They have been soaking. Most people recommend 20 minutes. Mine's probably been soaking for over an hour. We've got everything laid out here, so let me get you set up. We'll get this assembled. We'll move over to the other table and start on our lower planetaries and center section, center support. Okay, starting with our direct drum, if you watched the last video, you saw we drilled our bleed hole. We're going to leave the center seal out because we're going to direct feed the drum, the clutches. So we're going to start with our Sprag, 32 element Sprag. I am going to give it a coat of petroleum jelly for good measure, good lubrication. Okay, we've got our Sprag on. Next is the race. 2 lines face up. We're going to check it. Should freewheel clockwise, lock counterclockwise. So we're good. Install your top Sprag cover. Your shield. New spiral lock retainer. The main thing here is I don't want my openings for my spiral lock to fall in to this notch, so I'm going to put them out here. Okay guys, make sure that your spiral lock seats underneath the groove inside the drum. Make sure it's in there and locked really well. Okay, now when you get your seal kit, you're going to have several rings. You're going to notice this. I laid these out. You're going to have 2 that's the same and 1 that's almost will fit inside the other one. That does not go for this piston. So find your larger rings, seals, and then your inside piston seal. And remember, I'm leaving out the center seal. This is the point. If you're building a stock transmission, you would want to put this seal in with the lip facing up. So this would go in with the lip facing up. These going on the piston, we're going to install these with the lip facing down. Center seal, lip facing down. Okay guys, this is where I'm going to show you how to use the lip wizard. We're going to stick it on our center seal first. It's going to go inside the center seal. So we'll go ahead and get our piston just sat down in here. When you feel it catch, you'll want to work your lip wizard in. Putting a little pressure on the piston as you go. There it went. Little trick here, like I said, I have practiced this, is when you get your lip wizard around your outside seal, hold your finger right here, because when you roll it, it's going to want to roll into those lugs for your steels. So just kind of, as you put a little pressure, just keep your finger right here, just kind of pushing it away. And a little. Okay guys, there it is. Always look at it, inspect it, shine a light down in here, make sure you didn't roll that lip up. So now we've got our clutches that have been soaking. I'll time lapse through this, but basically you're going to put a steel clutch till you get all the way to the top. I'm using 5 steels, 5 clutches, and then when we get ready for our pressure plate, you should have a clutch at the top. So we'll get this going. I'm actually going to wet these. Okay, now guys, got all our clutches here. Put our pressure plate on here. Snap ring. Now I can show you the tool that we're going to use to put the springs into the direct drum. So if you are rebuilding a stock transmission, this is the point where you would get your stock springs, and mine only had 14. There's 16 pockets. Mine only had 14, and the 2 that were right straight across from each other were left out. This TCI kit actually has all 16, so I'll put those in now. Okay guys, got all our springs. We're going to put our retainer cover on, and when you put your snap ring in, when you put it in this press, make sure that your snap ring groove goes in between 2 of these lugs, because when this thing spins, it's going to push this snap ring open, and you want it to touch all 4 of these points instead of having the groove there and giving it a chance to open wider. So we'll put this on here. Actually going to put a little, well, that's why they make assembly goo, just so that stuff's not metal to metal when it starts up. This transmission may set for a while before I get a chance to turn it over, because we still got to get all the components in the truck and crank the engine, start the engine. So okay, we're set up over our press. Bring your arms in right to the edge of that ring there. You don't want to be on the outside edge and bend it. And it's going to take quite a bit of force to get this thing to compress. So when I get it compressed, I'll stop, put the snap ring in, and we'll stop time lapsing. Okay guys, it takes a lot to get this thing compressed. You want the snap ring to go in as easy as possible. Let's see if I can get it in here without losing it. That was good. My groove is lined up in between the lugs. Let's get it perfectly centered. I'm a little OCD. There we go. Let's take it out of the press. And there you have it, guys. our direct drum is completely assembled, we will check clearances one more time on the clutches. Make sure that we're still at our 50 thousandths stack up. Remember, rule of thumb, 10 thousandths per clutch. We got 5 clutches, 5 steels. So 5 clutches is going to equal 50 thousandths. This is where the handy dandy bent feeler gauges come in. So I can get down in between there. I don't want to force it in there and scar up one of the clutches, but we checked it dry, and I actually have checked it. But it's 50 thousandths. I am confident that it's 50 thousandths. So we're good. Let's go over to the table, and we'll start putting the output shaft into the lower planetary and get all the bearings and seals put in that unit, and we'll drop it down in the transmission, check our end play. So I've got you over here on the other table, and I'm sorry about the microphone. I had it pointed up and I was breathing into it. I could hear it when I was editing the first half of this video, so I've got it pointed away from me. Maybe the audio quality will be better. I've got you over here on this other table. This is the majority of the components in the transmission. Some key things we're going to have to watch out for. We're going to have to start putting in, we're about to start putting in some of the bushings that go in the output shaft, for example. I said earlier, and in my last video, you always want to look and measure how deep or how protruding the bearings are. For example, when we get ready to put this main shaft in, or the shaft in, this bearing is going to go, actually this bearing is going to go on the bottom side of this shaft, and there's a certain way it goes. You can see, if I take this apart, you have an inner or outer race, then you have your bearing, then you have a wide surface. That wide surface is actually going to go on first on your shaft, and it's going to stick up. So the main reason we want to always check our bushing clearances is because when this thing goes together, if you'll notice, this bearing is going to set down in here just like that. So you want to make sure that this bearing's not sticking up and pushing up against the seal here. So the next step before we install this is we're going to drive out this particular bushing right here. Now, another thing to notice, this is the bushing that goes down in the hole, and you can see that it's much wider. Also, it has a notch, and if you look down inside of there, when we drive it in there, this notch needs to be lined up over that hole. Now, it does not have any other lubrication holes in here, but it does here. So I'm going to take this over to the vise, and basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to take I've got a chisel or a punch, and I've kind of ground the end down to a smaller surface. But basically you'll drive this down, you'll see it in the time lapse. You'll drive this down, and when it rolls inside of this cavity, sometimes they have a, this one does not, yeah it does. Sometimes they have a little puzzle piece that puzzles them together, and it will actually push it apart, and that way when this bushing rolls, you can just pull it out. So let me get it set up in the vise. We'll go over here, and you can watch me time-lapse drive this out. It's not just be careful not to chisel into the side of your output shaft inside of here. And we also have on our forward planetary, there is a big bushing inside of there. We'll have to drive out from down inside of here. Okay, so let's go to the vise and drive this out. Okay, we got our output shaft bushing in, and I want to show you guys something. Being transparent with you, I screwed the first one up, and I couldn't figure out when I pressed it in, how did I mess that up? I pressed it in and I checked it with my shaft. I stuck this in here, and when I put it in here, I couldn't even get it in here and get it to turn. It was so tight. So I ordered a new output shaft bushing, and I started putting it in. I noticed there was a lip down here. You can't see it now because I've already put the second one in. There was a lip inside of here, and when I pressed the first one in, I pressed it in too far and I caused this to swell over that lip. And I can show you what I mean. I have another output shaft here, and if you can see down in there, get a light. You see that ridge? Notice how close that hole, that ridge is to that hole. The shaft I'm using is not that close. It's actually, if I can get it turned just right, you might can see down in there, in that groove that I lined up over the lubrication hole. It's probably a 1/16 or even an 1/8 of an inch above the lubrication hole, which was causing my bearing to stick up more than I wanted it to. So when I tried to force it on down in there, it raised up on the bottom and caused it to get really tight. Now this one fits. I got it right on top of that ridge, but as you can see, my bearing doesn't touch. It's close, but it doesn't touch. And you're going to say, well, why don't you just use that other shaft you got? Well, that was my thoughts too, but as you can see, this one is, if you can see in the camera, it's got grooves chewed all into the sides of these, so this one is junk. But I just wanted to show that to you. Be honest with you guys, I would have got this video out last week, but I had to wait on my extra bushing to come. But make sure that if you're putting a wider bushing in, if you put a narrow bushing in, and here's the one that came out, or one of the ones that came out. I don't know if it came out of that other shaft or this one, but you can see it's much narrower, and you can press it down even farther and not worry about having to bend your bearing or your bushing on that shaft or on that shelf right there. So with that being said, just be careful with that. Let's go ahead and get our bushing pressed in our lower Planetary, and we'll get to assembling the lower half of this transmission. Nothing special here about inserting this bushing. Get it started straight. I'm going to use my widest seal driver, and we are going to press it down flush with the top surface. Okay guys, we got our forward Planetary bushing installed. I did install it flush. The center support, the stock build that I took apart, actually had a plastic spacer that goes in here. The new kit I have has a bronze, so it's going to ride on top of this. So that just needs to be flush. Also, I don't know where I picked it up from. I saw another channel. I tried using the tool I showed you earlier. This works, and my idea was that was round and it would not do as much damage on the inside of the bore, but it takes a lot of hand holding, meaning you got to finesse it. So I saw a guy, and I just took a screwdriver, an old screwdriver that had a flat tip. I had a Craftsman screwdriver that had a broken tip, and I made a tool that looks like this, kind of like a little thin wall chisel, and you can get right in behind there and drive it out. So you probably seen me using this in the previous video, driving this out, and I just wanted to mention I switched from this over to this. All right, so enough rambling. Let's get all this put together and check our in play, and we will close out the video. Again, nothing special here. I got it started with the bushing driver. Just made sure it was started square. Now we'll press it in. I won't show the other side for the sake of time. It's the same. You press it in the same. So. Okay, we got our bushings put in our sun gear shaft. The next thing is our center support. Now you can't drive this one out with a hammer and a punch or chisel. It has to be pressed out. The only thing we got to watch for is to make sure that we get this hole lined up with that hole. So I'm going to time lapse you. We'll press out this bushing, get this one in. That'll get all of our bushings in our lower part of our transmission. Then we'll start putting the output shaft on the main shaft, lower planetary, front planetary, center support. Drop it down in the transmission. Check our output shaft clearance. We'll end out this video. This one's going to run kind of long, and I'm trying to keep these videos detailed but short. So let's get this pressed out, this one in, and we'll get this assembled and dropped in the transmission. Okay, we got our bushing in our center support. We got our bottom hole lined up as you saw me pointing in the time lapse. Make sure you get that hole, that square groove lined up with your hole. Since we're at the center support, we'll go ahead and get the piston seals and get the piston put in the center support. You're going to be looking for a seal that has the lip pointing out, and these lips are going to point down, both of them, on the piston. So both lips will point down. So let's get these seals in, get the center support put together, and then we'll start on our bearings and bushings in the lower planetary, get our roller clutch put in the reaction carrier, and then get our center support put in. Okay, we're going to try this with the lip wizard. It's kind of going to be kind of hard to get that one started, but notice the pockets inside of your center support. And you've got these 3 notches. They're going to line up, so we will get our center seal put in. I tried to use my hands to work those seals to where they would stick down, because I don't know how well this is going to work trying to push these down in here. There's not really, I don't have the expensive tools that you slide in there to get these going, so we're going to try to do this way. So bear with me. Well, the lip wizard does work getting that in there. You'll feel it drop in. I had to do it twice, but I got it. I did not practice this one, so y'all saw that live firsthand. So now I'm going to put my springs in the spring pockets. What I'm going to do is just go to the edge on every one so they're evenly spaced. Give them a little lubrication. And that's how I did it. One in each end of each hole, as long as they're evenly spaced. And this ring here and snap ring, you can probably put it on with your hands. These springs are not really that stiff. And if I can get this snap ring, In the snap ring, there's no bevel. It's just a flat snap ring, so it just can go only one way, and there's no orientation as to which way you should turn it. No grooves to watch out for. So we're going to try to put this on with gloves. And there's the center support. All right. The only other thing we've got to put on here are our ceiling rings. You've got 4. Got 1, 2, 3, 4. And with our TCI full manual valve body, we're only going to put 3 on here. We're going to leave this second ceiling ring off right here. And a good identifier of the second ceiling ring is the one below these 2 holes. That's going to be a part of the dual feed mod. So I will put these on. Then we'll move down here and start on our main shaft. I did take my gloves off. We're going to start with identifying our bearings. So you've got 3 of these bearings, and they all look different, and you'll be able to identify them. The larger one, see how it's got a large race, and if you take the bearing apart, you can actually see that it has a large race on the bottom. That's going to go inside of our main shaft drum, our main shaft gear. And the one we've talked about already that has to be recessed into this, up the output shaft. Remember our clearance we just talked about? We'll go ahead and put this one on. We're going to put the large lipped race on the bottom of this shaft. So let me get some lube and stick it on. We'll stick him on there like that. Lube up our bearing a little bit. Now, okay, that one's done. Take your large race, some assembly lube, assembly goo. It's going to stick on the bottom. We'll grease our bearing. I'm going to put a little light coat of assembly lube on there. I don't like for things to be run dry, so. Lip of the race goes down, smooth side up. And that gets 2 of the 3. Now we can actually put our output shaft and our lower planetary together. So we'll do that now. That's not too hard of a task. Take your lower planetary, set it over your shaft, spline it up. Output shaft goes on. We'll put a little lube inside here as well on our bronze bushing. Non-tapered snap ring. This is your smallest ring. Will go on your output shaft. I've actually got this propped up on the edge of the table. We're going to move it over to my press here in a second. I've got some 2x4 set up. I don't have the proper table to set this thing up, so we are going to use the shop press to do that. So let's check and make sure all this is seated good. Snap rings in there. all good. Now, if you were not running the Sonex bearing kit, now would be the time to stick on your bronze back washer. It would go in those 4 holes just like that. But since we're using the Sonex bearing, we're not going to be using this. So let me move this over here where we can stand it up, and we'll finish getting it put together and in the transmission. Okay, one more thing before we start putting this together. On our reaction carrier, we have a new roller clutch. We're going to put that in, and it only goes one way. So let's get some lube on this, get it in here. We'll be ready to drop it on our assembly. Okay, when you're putting this in, you may have to push your rollers a little bit, and you'll do just like I did. You'll push them out of the cage if you're not careful. That's why I was hoping if I put that assembly lube in there, it would stick them where they wouldn't fall out. They're very easy to push out. But this should only go one way. And when we get it in there, we'll check the rotation. It is just like your direct drum Sprag. It should only rotate clockwise when we get this assembled. So let's get this in. We'll get it checked. Okay, that's together. So I'm going to move you over to the makeshift tool over here. Get you set up where you can see what's going on. Okay. Now, if you'll notice the 4 tang holes right here, it does receive one of these bronze back bushings or spacers, washers, whatever you want to call it. We're going to lube it up and drop it down in the hole. Being sure to get assembly glue on both sides where it will stick. I know that's probably a lot, but I don't like things to be not lubricated, so get that stuck in there. Now we will set our reaction carrier. First of all, we have a silencer ring that goes on the outside of your lower Planetary, and I will stick a little bit of lubrication up in the reaction carrier, up in here, just so it's got plenty of lubrication. And we'll put a little on the gears as well. Reaction carrier goes down on there. Just have to work it in place. Now here's where the other bearing that we looked at, if you'll notice, this other bearing has a flat race with a large lip. We're going to set that aside for right now with the bearing. And the small part of the race, this is going to go against your sun gear. So we'll stick this into our center support. I'll go into our center support. Now we will insert our sun gear right here. The 2 grooves go down, as well as this has a tapered, see how those grooves are cut tapered? That goes down. The flat side goes up. So we'll get these together, stick them down inside, mesh them up, then our bearing will sit on top of this. So let's get that done. Okay, one last thing before we put our center support in. Make sure you got your race up in here. Is my center support came with a plastic spacer that goes in that groove right there. My new kit actually came with a bronze, so don't forget that. We're going to put that in, then we'll set the center support in here and test the rotation. Okay, now that it's together, this should spin, the reaction carrier should spin clockwise, but not counterclockwise. And that's right. So we can spin it clockwise, not counterclockwise. So let's get our reverse band put in the transmission case with the fretting ring, the skinny ring that goes under the reaction carrier, and we'll check our in play on our output shaft. Okay, remember guys, if you're not using the Sonex bearing kit that I used, remember the black mark's going to face up, and I've already got a bushing down there with a 15,000 shim. We're going to see how that works out on our output shaft in play. If you're not using that, don't forget to put this on your output shaft in the holes, lube it up, and you're going to have this that drops down in those 4 locking slots right there. These tabs are going to lock in. And if your output shaft clearance doesn't measure up, the ATSG manual says 7 to 19 thousandths, and I'll show you how I'm going to check that. You'll have to replace this component right here. They make different thicknesses. So let's get our, I've got a 15,000 shim in there. Let's go ahead and put our bearing down in there. Now we've got to get our reverse band and fretting ring in to set our center support in. Okay, I've got you guys set up to give you the best view I can get without interfering with me. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to put our reverse band in and see if we can get it hooked to the 2 lugs. This can be a little bit tricky. You got to get these 2 lugs lined up with those 2 pins and setting the other part of the band sitting on that shelf. So let's start wrestling with it. Okay, now we're going to install our fretting ring. It's the skinny ring that goes in that your center support sets on. It should be one of the easiest components to install. Okay, now that that's in, I want to pick you up and show you something that I did get an idea from another channel. Southpaw Auto Works used these vice grips to hold their main shaft because this thing is heavy. Also, if you notice, you need to mark where your center support hole is so you can lug it down in the case and get it right over the hole the first try. So if we're looking down here in the case, got to look at your valve body. There's the hole that you got to use the special 3/8 12 point is going to be right here. Let me get my pick tool and I'll show you. So there's the lug you want to be lined up with. So my yellow mark should fit right down in here. So let's get this set down in here. Okay, that's sat down in there. If you don't get lined up with a hole, you can reach down and grab your output shaft and give it a turn because you may have lifted your center support up off the reaction carrier. So let me get this out. We'll put our next band in, snap ring in, and check in play. Okay, the next snap ring that goes in, but you'll notice it's beveled. The bevel goes up, and you want your opening, according to ATSG manual, to be at the 9 o'clock. So if I'm looking at this transmission, this is 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So it's going to be in this direction here. So let's get this installed. We'll flip it up and check in play. Okay, there you have it, guys. Now let's hope that our 15,000 shim gives us the in play that we want. So I'm going to cut you off for a second. We'll flip it up, check in play, and that should be the end of this video. Okay, last thing before we close out the video, guys, we're going to check the output shafts play, and I've got you looking through the governor cover hole. I'm going to zoom in, try to show you where we're going to check. So you can see the Sonax bearing and then the output shaft flange right there. So according to ATSG manual, we're looking for 7 to 19 thousandths. So I'm going to take a guess at it, and I'm going to go with a 10 thousandths feeler gauge. See if we can get it in there. I'm going to hold pressure up on the shaft as I go in. And a 10 goes in fairly easy. So let's jump up to a 12. So now we're going to try 12. Holding pressure on the shaft. It goes in, but I have to force it in. Let's jump up to a 14. I was hoping to be on the 12 thousandths side. Wanted to be somewhere in the middle of 7 to 19, but let's try a 14. See how that works out for us. Holding pressure on the shaft. I can push it in there. It's tight. Let's go up to a 16. I could probably force it in there. So we're going to call it between 14 and 15 thousandths. I'm not going to put any more shims in there because the only ones I've got are 10 thousandths. So we're going to call it right there and in this video. So 14 thousandths, what we're going to call it. Don't forget to torque your center support bolt. The ATSG manual recommends 22 foot-pounds. Make sure that's tight and don't miss it. The next video, we'll get our direct drum put in. We will build our forward drum, put the clutches in it, get our intermediate clutches put in, get the stack up in the transmission. I'll also be doing a separate video on the Sonax case saver, so stay tuned for that. If you've stuck it out this long, I appreciate it, guys. If you like this kind of content, hit that like button. If you want to see more, hit that subscribe button. Thanks again, and we'll catch you in the next episode.